Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to talk about common issues with the Lexus GS-F. And first and foremost, very common, you've heard me talk about it in other videos, is the interior trim delamination issue. Very, very common. If it hasn't failed and been replaced, it will fail. So just, I'll link to the video about that down below if it is an issue on your car or if you're looking at one that has that issue. So common issues specific to the GS-F, there's one that's starting to become more prevalent, and it is called the coolant valley plate leak. So the valley plate is what sits underneath the big blue piece on that's the intake plenum, intake manifold. It sits underneath that, and in order to replace that, you have to take everything off. But what the cause of it is really heat cycle related, not so much miles. It's age and heat cycles. But it's this big, long valley plate that they sealed with a special sealant. And over time, between the coolant they were using, age and heat cycles, that breaks down and starts to leak. So if you're looking at one of these cars used, I would highly, highly recommend either taking it to a mechanic or buying a small scope, either one that you plug into your phone or a dedicated one, and putting that scope underneath the intake manifold and just kind of looking around for that valley plate and see if you see the pink coolant. The OEM coolant on these cars was pink, and when it hits air, it gets real crusty and it kind of like expands, I guess. But a telltale sign, if you can't smell it, is you look at the overflow tank that's right there in the engine bay, and if it's empty, you should start looking. If it's left too long, the car will start overheating, obviously, and then there's other issues. But the valley plate, the reason it's such a big issue on these cars is because it's a very expensive fix. There's people that if you get it done at a dealer, you're talking $2,000 to $2,800 US in order to get that replaced, and it's almost all labor. These cars have 16 fuel injectors, 8 port and 8 direct injection injectors. So you have fuel lines, connectors, everything else that you have to take off. And as these cars get older, those connectors are going to break. You're going to have to replace connectors. There's a lot of other stuff to replace while you're in there, especially as these cars age. There's the PCV stuff, the coolant lines on the front of the engine. There's a lot involved in that, and it becomes more expensive as these cars get older. Specifically on like the Lexus ISF, which those cars are now 15 years old, you see a lot of that, and that's a very important purchase point if you're buying an ISF. Is the very first thing that you see people talking about is valley plate has been done. Okay, well, these cars are just now getting up to almost 10 years old. The first ones were in service in 2015. This car was in service in 2015, so being that this is December 2024, almost 10 years old. And this car has 50,000 miles on it, and guess what? It had the valley plate leak. So I'll show pictures on your screen here right now. Fortunately, I have a really good independent Toyota master mechanic that he used to work for Toyota, kind of opened his own business, and he's kind of been my go-to mechanic for about the last 10 or 15 years. I'm pretty mechanically inclined. There's a lot of stuff that I'm willing to do, but this engine, as I'm still learning a little bit more about it, I didn't want to quite tackle that, so I had him do it. And he's done one before. He charged me about $1,000 to do it. And it was probably discounted because there was other stuff I was having him do to the car at the same time. So the point is, I would definitely shop around when this issue pops up, because it will. 100% of these are going to have that problem. It's a known issue. Budget it. If you're seeing a car that's unusually cheap and it's got that problem, just factor that into your purchase price, because you're going to have to get it done. Other issues, these cars eat brakes and they eat tires. It's not really it's a known thing. They're heavy cars, they're powerful cars. They have soft, sticky rubber. Pilot Super Sports or Pilot Sport Cup 2s at $300 or $400 a tire. They last 15, 20,000 miles, and then you got to replace them. So the brakes are Brimbos, 6-piston and 4-piston, and they are massive rotors. They're almost 16 inches, I think 15.5-inch rotors. Huge rotors, heavy rotors, and they don't last very long because the pads that the Brembo runs are so aggressive that it eats into the rotor over time. So expect to replace rotors every 20 to 30,000 miles. You might be able to squeak 40,000 if you do a lot of highway miles, but it's a thing where it's a maintenance item, it's a wear item, you're gonna replace them. The OEM pads are very expensive. They're very, very dusty. One of the things that I've done on this before I went to the carbon ceramic brakes was there's a Power Stop Z26. They make pads. You can get them at Rock Auto here in the US, $50 per axle, so $100 for brake pads, and it's 90% as good as the Brimbos. They're not quite as aggressive for the initial bite, but it can save you a lot of money. The rotors, there is a rotor specific to each corner because they're slotted and they're directional. So there is a left front, a right front, a left rear, a right rear, 4 different part numbers, 4 different rotors. They're the same as the RCF, so at least they're available. You can buy them even at AutoZone or O'Reilly's, Rock Auto, but if you want the original Brimbos, you're gonna pay a little bit more. For a brake job at the dealer, it's probably gonna be around $1,500, and I've seen as high as $2,000. That's something to expect on these cars, is brakes and tires. Speaking of tires, another common issue on these cars is the inner front tires will prematurely wear. And the cause of that is the lower front control arm bushings. They're a liquid-filled bushing that they'll either crack over time or just start to wear out, and the silicone or whatever that's in them leaks out, and it causes tow. Say you get under your car, you look at them, oh, they look fine, they're not leaking. Well, if they have a lot of wear to them, when you brake, it's actually towing the front tires just a little bit. And so just over time, it's gonna cause excessive tow on the front. So you think, oh, I'm gonna go get an alignment, that'll fix it. Well, that shows inspect. That was what was happening with this car. The answer is upgrade the front lower control arm bushings. It is a DIY. You can do it in your driveway. You can pay a mechanic to do it. It's not very difficult. If you get the stiffer bushings, there's a little more involved because you have to drop the subframe just a little bit to gain a little bit more access. But it is a couple $100 to upgrade those. There's some examples of what's out there. There's Figs Engineering. That's what I ended up running on this. RR Racing, Megan. There's several options, and it's from streetable all the way to like straight race bushings, which you want, no play and super stiff. You can do that, but that will prevent in the future wearing out tires prematurely. Another common issue that you'll see, and it's not specific to the GS-F, it's specific to the 4th gen GS, and that is the sunroof rattle. This car's had that too. And the easy way to see if it's your sunroof seal is what's the culprit is if it's rattling, you can take your finger and push up on the glass, and if it stops rattling, it's the seal. The seal will shrink over time, and the part is $40 or $50, and it's about a 1-hour do-it-yourself. If you pay the dealer, they're gonna charge you about $200 to replace it. The dealer will take the entire glass out to do it because that's the way Lexus says to do it. However, you can take 2 of the screws out, pivot it up a little bit, gives you some room. You can do it on the car, not super difficult. The sunroof itself also has a little bit of adjustment in the tracks, so you can tighten it up even further. But I tried doing that. This one still rattled, and so now it's replaced and it does not rattle. Another issue that these cars have is with the taillights and the headlights getting either moisture in them, or specific to the taillights, there's like a black chrome inside them that will start bubbling and flaking off. There's 4 taillights on this, and they're a couple $100 a piece, so you can see how that can get expensive pretty quick. This car has not done that, but I can see kind of the beginnings of it. I'm just gonna leave it for now. The headlights, there's a couple issues with the headlights, and one is moisture that gets in them. That's fixable if you're a DIYer. You got to take the front bumper off and then take the headlight off. You bake the headlight a little bit to soften up the adhesive. You take the lens off, you reseal it. That, if you're wanting to do it on the cheap, that's the way to do it. Otherwise, replacement. And these cars being out of warranty, these headlights are $4,300 each. So in December 2024, so they're very, very expensive headlights. Now you can see why people want to do it the DIY route. Another common issue is the daytime running light, which is part of the headlight assembly. Those will start flickering or not working at all. Well, headlight replacement, otherwise you got to take everything apart. You can work on the LED driver that I believe is what fails on those. But that's something that you need to keep in mind as well. And again, with the headlights, another common issue is the headlights will start to delaminate. Porsche has a known issue with this, specifically if you put paint protection film on them. This car had paint protection film since it was new. When I bought the car earlier this year, I had the paint protection film removed and applied new paint protection film. However, the headlights, I was advised not to because they're starting to delaminate. So that means if you pull the paint protection film off, it's going to completely take off that outer layer of plastic on the headlights. Then you have to sand them down, re-clear them, new PPF. You know, there's a lot more that's involved. So the point of all this is the headlights, if you're looking at a used one, pay close attention to them and see if they're delaminating, see if there's a little chip in them, you know, if there's any moisture. Just know that you're going to have some dollars you may have to spend on it in the future. So still working with the exterior, the front bumper has a carbon fiber, real carbon fiber piece that goes just above the bottom of it. And you can see this has the same issue that the interior trim does, where it delaminates. Well, this, if it has even just a couple little road pebbles or something like that, the clear will start peppering, or the clear will start coming off. And so if you are replacing this part, it's $8,500, very, very expensive. Fortunately, it's pretty easy for a body shop to refinish. You have to pull the bumper to do so, but you can get them refinished, re-cleared, and then put paint protection film on it so it doesn't do it again. I'm definitely an advocate of paint protection film. If you've seen my other channels, Scott HD, you know, I'm a detailer as one of my businesses. Paint protection film, paint correction, ceramic coatings. I do all of that. I'm very familiar with it. Back to the exterior, another issue, the spoiler. Same issue as this front piece. The spoiler is about $8,000, and not only does it pit and get cloudy or yellow or delaminate, but it actually can shrink too. And so there's been reports the edges of the spoiler will actually start lifting. I don't know if there's a fix to it, but I think it's heat related. And so it's expensive. There is an aftermarket alternative. They make $1,200, $1,500, something like that. It's better than $8,500 or $8,000, but that is a known issue on these cars, especially if it's a higher mileage one that's sat outside. You know, you may pay close attention to that if you're looking for a new GS-F. So other common issues that these cars had, a lot of the ones that had this issue have already been resolved, but the driver's door has a door check. When you open the door, kind of that stop or the little resistance, that piece, it likes to pop. And so on this car, it was replaced many years ago, but it's the piece here. And as you open the door, it would pop. And so see, there's like a spot that it keeps it, there would be noise right there. Not very difficult to replace, it's just 2 bolts. It's maybe a $40 part, but if you open the door and you hear noise, that's what it is. Speaking of the driver's door lock actuator, common to fail. When you get in a car, if you're buying one, if you're looking at one, lock the doors, unlock the doors, lock the doors. Make sure it beeps back at you when you lock all the doors. If it doesn't beep and the beep hasn't been turned off, then the driver's door actuator is probably the culprit. And it's about $400 to replace. It's a very expensive part. You'd think for a little piece of plastic with a little motor in it, but very expensive. You have to take the door panel off and a couple other pieces to replace it. If you go to the dealer, they're going to charge you $500, $600, $700 to replace it. So just know that if you're buying one, check that out, make sure it's good. So moving on to the inside, there's a common issue with the heating and air conditioning as far as where it blows and the temperature from the left side to the right side. And the issue is there are 5 servo motors that control where the heat and the cold go, where you want the vents on your face, on the floor, the defrost. There's little motors with rods and actuators that control all of that, and it's all controlled electronically. So Lexus has a service campaign where they've extended that warranty on those specific parts for, I believe, an additional 7 years. It might be 10, but I'll leave that in the video description so you can see that. So if you're looking at a GS-F, make sure, put the heat on high on one side and all the way cold on the other side and make sure the temperatures match, then switch and do that. Go through all of it, put it on the defrost, up top, down low, kind of mix it all, make sure they all work. The Lexus, if you have that issue, what they'll do, take it into the dealership, they have what's called a servo sweep. So they can plug their computer in and they'll just basically test the limits of each of the servos. It marks it on the computer as that's the new max for each of them, kind of a relearn procedure. And they'll also add grease to the pivot rods for those actuators, for those servo motors. That usually fixes the issue, but what ruins them is, I don't think they came with enough grease to start with, but if you're in a colder climate, this grease, it gets more viscous, more stiff, and so those motors have to work a lot harder, and then eventually the motors fail. So if you go into a dealer, or if you have a fancy scanner, you can plug it in and see if there's any stored codes. If there's stored codes, they'll probably replace those servos. But if there's not, they're just going to do a servo sweep and re-grease it. They're going to mark it as that service campaign's been done. This car had it done at 20,000 miles. Again, it has 50,000 now. It had it done at 20,000, and the previous owner had another complaint about it at 40,000. When I had it in there at the dealer for the carbon fiber trim, I had them look at it too, because it still does it on occasion, but it's not all the time. And there weren't any stored codes, so all they did is do a servo relearn again. But because it's out of warranty and the customer service campaign's already been done, I had to pay for it. So it's an hour of labor, $179 is what it cost me to do that, to have them go and reset everything. Another issue with these cars on the inside is you may hear a buzzing or like a thumping sound from either the back seat or the passenger seat, the right side seat. What that was the initial programming for the low pressure fuel pump had some relays or something that weren't quite programmed right, so they start buzzing. And there's a fix for that. There's a service campaign for it. It's not a recall. And so if that's going on your car, take it to the Lexus dealer and they know exactly what to fix. But I'll leave all of that in the comments, but it's also in the GS-F spreadsheet if you look on the tabs on the bottom, it's on the last tab. Another thing that these cars had, almost all of them have already been done, but these had a recall on the high pressure fuel pumps. These pumps are on the backside top of the engine. There's one for the left, one for the right side, and they're mechanically driven pumps. The original versions of the pumps had a plastic housing. Well, that housing could crack, leak fuel, and the exhaust manifold's right underneath that. So guess what? Catches fire. And there are a few of these cars, when I've gotten pictures of the salvage title ones, that caught fire, and you can tell it caught fire in the engine bay, and that's probably what happened. So anyway, that being addressed, the high pressure fuel pumps are mechanical. They run off of a lobe on the camshaft. Well, those inherently make noise. So when a mechanical contact with a mechanical fuel pump is going to make noise. And so people will have complaints, and I've read this through reading service history on these cars. It sounds like there's crickets in the engine bay, kind of like a squeak, 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 squeak. And all that is, it's the mechanical pumps. And if it was under warranty, then they went ahead and replaced them. And these are very expensive pumps. They're like $1,300 a piece. And it's like an hour of labor to replace them. They're pretty easy to replace. But people would get them replaced under warranty, and then 10, 20,000 miles later, they have the same complaint that it's doing it again. Well, that's just the nature of these pumps. They make that kind of noise. They make kind of a chirping noise. You can probably change your oil weight. That may affect it. I just run what Toyota says to run, what Lexus says to run, 10W30. This car had the recall done at about 10,000 miles, and then the fuel pumps were replaced under warranty, high pressure fuel pumps, were replaced under warranty at 30,000 miles because they were making noise. And I had this car, I had a Lexus dealer do a pre-purchase inspection on this for me, and one of their complaints, which this is the dealer, said that the fuel pumps are making noise, and so they're making a chirping noise. So if you listen really close here, I'm going to put this video up on your screen. If you listen to this video at idle, you can hear kind of the chirping. So that's the noise I'm talking about, and it doesn't affect the fuel pressure. And the mechanic that I talked to at the Lexus dealer, he's aware of it as well, and he said there's no fixing it. You can replace it all you want. It'll go away for a few thousand miles, but it'll come right back. It's just, they're a mechanical pump, they're gonna make noise. So don't let that turn you off if you're looking at one of these cars and you hear the squeaking under the engine bay like it's a belt or something. It's not a belt, it's the high pressure fuel pumps, and they're just gonna make noise. And one of the last things, pretty minor, a lot of these cars have already had it taken care of, is the original navigation system, which that's definitely a love or hate. That's for another story, but the navigation will show the either incorrect time or the incorrect location for where you're at. So if, say you're driving down Interstate 20 and it shows you're over on the feeder or on the service lane, and it's just, it'll never correct itself. So there is a fix for that, and it's not the map software, it's an actual hardware. There is a fix for it, there's a service campaign for it, and Lexus will fix that for you. If it's out of warranty, if it's beyond the miles and the time, then you'll probably have to pay for an hour at the Lexus dealer for them to fix that. Alternatively, you can always get Android Auto or CarPlay, get a Lexion or some kind of upgraded system, and then you don't even have to deal with that. So I do have 2 addendums. You're seeing this after I've already edited the other parts of this video. I have 2 other addendums that I want to add to this common problem video. The GS-F was produced 2016 through 2020, and starting in 2017 on to 2020, so that means only the 16s didn't have this. The 17 through 20s had the adaptive shocks, not ride height control, but adaptive damping on the shocks. These shocks were known to leak very early on. There was a defect in the internal oil seal, so you could see, if you look at the service history on some of these, as early as 5,000 to 8,000 miles, they were already having shocks go bad. So they have this green fluid inside them. They're very obvious if they're leaking. All you have to do, if you're gonna take this to a mechanic to get it inspected, simply take the wheels off when they're looking at the brakes, inspecting the brakes, and look at the shocks. If they're leaking, know that you're gonna replace, I think they're less than $200 a piece, so you're talking $800, but there is some labor involved, especially in the rear. You have to take the back seats out to get to access the tops of the shocks. The fronts are very easy to replace, not hard at all. If you're semi-mechanically inclined, you can probably do it yourself, save you some money, or do like what other people do. They start leaking, just get some coilovers or something like that. But that said, that is something that it is a common issue. This is a 16, so it just has regular shock struts on them. And then finally, the other issue that was brought to my attention, which I forgot to include, was the amps for these cars, specifically the ones that are equipped with the Mark Levinson stereo. They sit where a spare tire normally would be in these vehicles. So I'm going to show you now, while I'm talking, where these are. The issue that arises is the pressure release vents. So like if you slam your door, that pressure has to go somewhere. Well, those pressure relief spots are so those pressure release vents are in the trunk. And so what you need to do is, if you're buying one of these or looking at one of these, simply pop the trunk, pull up all the carpet, all the covers, pull the covers out, everything in the trunk, look at the amp. If there's any signs of moisture there, that is what you need to replace. And the reason that's a big deal is because the Mark Levinson amp, for example, is about $2,000 to replace. I think it's a little higher now, but the last time I looked, it was around $2,000. Very expensive. There are a couple companies out there that offer rebuild services or repair services for those amps if you don't want to spend $2,000. But just know that that's an expensive gotcha if you don't know what you're looking for. If you run the stereo, it's popping, cracking, or it even doesn't power on at all, that is your cause right there. So those remaining 2 issues are the only other things that I could come up with that I think that you should really watch out for with these cars. There's a lot of gotchas, but again, these are fantastic cars. You just have to know what you're looking for if you're looking for one of these used, or if you currently own one, know what to stay on top of. Specifically that amp, if you haven't replaced those vents, they're a few $100s, but very easy to replace. Suggest doing that if you have any signs of moisture in your trunk. It's not your trunk seal, it's not your spoiler, it is the vents underneath that vent out and relieve pressure. So I thought I would just kind of share, those are really the common problems, some specific to the GS-F, some specific to the GS in general. But they're really reliable cars. Don't let this turn you off from buying a GS-F. Just know that, you know, these are not Honda Civics. So when you, or a Toyota Camry, when you go into looking for one of these, they have higher running costs. They have other little issues that you have to take care of. But once it's sorted, it's a fantastic car. And so I encourage you to go look for one. They're getting much harder to find. So thanks again for watching, guys, and we'll see you soon.